welcome everyone to the Keen on Yoga podcast. This is another solo episode today by me. So I hope you enjoy it. And it's on the contentious episode of, well, not contentious, but it might be contentious when I start speaking about it, of the Yamas and Niyamas. So let's cut to the chase perhaps, and I'll just do the advertising spiel later for you, blah, blah, what I'm doing and stuff, all right? So my thoughts on the Yamas and Niyamas and why I think that we might be putting the cart before the horse, as you say, or getting it the wrong way around. Because so often I hear on the podcast and from individuals, yoga is about following the Yamas and Niyamas, right? Now, albeit a noble sentiment, because we're socialized beings, and I do, let's start from the start. I do believe that it's better to act well, obviously, than act badly to each other. But do Patanjali's Yamas and Niyamas really do that for us? And are they the best way to approach our yoga practice and daily life? Now, the last podcast I did on my own, I was talking about Hatha yoga and the idea that there's something inside that isn't harmonious. And this is phrased in Hatha yoga cosmology as Ida and Pingala, the two channels, and Sushumna, the balanced central channel. Now, whether that's a metaphor or whether that's kind of reality is another debate, obviously. But nevertheless, there's something about aligning the passive and active parts of ourselves, the dynamic and analytic parts of ourselves, and the creative and thoughtful and reflective part. And you can see this in daily life, how things pan out, right? Not forcing ourselves on life, but not shrinking away from life either. I mean, Krishna says the same in the Bhagavad Gita. That person who doesn't, he says exactly that, basically. Life doesn't run away from or doesn't force themselves on life. Anyway, so there's something inside that needs to be aligned. And this is why the yoga teachers of the 20th century, namely Patabi, the famous ones, let's say, Patabi Joyce, BKS Iyengar. Krishnamurti was a bit of a thing on himself, I think, but at least those two, they always said, let's take asana first, because there's something in the body that needs to be aligned, let's say. And I'm using aligned, not purified, because purified has this idea that we're bad, we're evil, we're impure, like a kind of religious, quasi-religious kind of. And it's not that. It's not that there's wrong. It's not that we're wrong inside, innately shamed, shameful, sinful, as the Western traditions say. Yeah, it's more that there's a disalignment of energies inside, causing confusion. That's all. It's confused energies that stop us, that block us from seeing things as they are. Yeah. So if we take the Yamas and Niyamas first, this is their idea, not mine this time, but I agree with it. If we go there to take the Yamas and Niyamas first off and try and act that way, we're acting, how can we know that we're acting well? Yeah, because there's stuff inside us that is not allowing us to see how to act according to Yama, Niyama, yeah, or according to acting correctly in daily life, yeah, rightfully, justly, yeah, say. But in the first place, we might say, there's a slight differentiation between modern Western thought and yoga and original yoga thought, because yoga originally, there was a certain way to live life, but only to keep the conscious clear, right? So if you look at the Bhagavad Gita and Krishna's instructions about how to live a life, it's only for Arjuna, he's only asking him to do certain action, to live a certain way, not for ethical reasons. I mean, he says at the start of the book, this is Krishna speaking to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, he says at the start of the book, all these people have died already. They've died and they've been reborn so many times, So, I mean, I'm not saying, it doesn't matter if we kill people, because we don't have that perspective anymore, but there's something originally, and let's say the original iterations of yoga were beyond social morality, let's say, because they were looking at the bigger picture and say, well, what is it that we're really looking for? Yeah. And so the instructions, the moral instructions, let's say, for Krishna, and this is my perspective, you might debate this, to Arjuna, he's saying actually, just keep your conscience clear, act in a certain way that you don't involve yourself anymore with worldly politics. Yeah, because if you do, there'll be no solution. Remember in the Bhagavad Gita, this already, it's a civil war, right? So there's no solution, right? There's no possibility of ahimsa in the first place, right? Because if Arjuna doesn't protect his family, he'll basically let them be killed, which is violence, right? Albeit tacit, albeit passive. His passivity leads to violence. He's still committing a violence. Or he kills the enemy, Yeah, he has reason to do so, but that's obviously a violence as well. So this is why I prioritize somewhat the Bhagavad Gita over the Yoga Sutras, because the Yoga Sutras it's kind of an easy way to look at things. Oh, there's a right answer. It's clear how to act in, ahimsa and satya and asteya. It's clear how not to steal and how to not be violent, etc. But if you look at the Bhagavad Gita, which is a companion text after all, right, in the classical period, written in a similar time, a little bit later, I believe, similar-ish time, it kind of suggests very differently. It suggests that, well, moral life is very difficult and really unresolvable, because sooner or later, whatever you do, even the best of actions are going to hurt someone down the road. I often say in workshops and stuff, and I know it's a slightly contentious issue, because we want to believe that it's easy to act morally and easy to act well, and that we don't cause other people's sufferings, but of course we don't want to cause other people's sufferings. But even walking down the road or turning on a light switch, someone's suffering for that somewhere along the, somewhere down the line, right? If you think about it, in the raw production of those materials, right, that cause it, that for electricity or for laying the roads, right? You've got people mining in Africa or wherever, right? Whatever we do, however noble our actions, in the end, we're going to be causing himsa, violence to someone, right? We're going to be stealing from someone. Of course, we think, oh, we don't steal. We try to live ethically. We shop ethically, and we wear vegan trainers, etc. I'm not mocking these decisions. I think they're very rightful, very noble. I try to do the same, right? But it's not approaching the problem deep enough, I suppose. And so the yoga approaches it from the deepest level, that life can't be resolved in that manner. Of course, it doesn't mean you can do what you want now, but we'll come to that in a minute, I think. It just means that it's a little bit more problematic than, well, I'm just trying to live by the yamas. I've done my TT in Bali. I don't eat meat, and I don't kill mosquitoes, and I only buy ethical clothing. It's like, well, if only it could be that simple, right? It doesn't say those. Listen, it doesn't mean those choices aren't valid, and reasonable. You do what you can, obviously, rather than just thinking, well, nothing can be changed, and so I won't do anything. That's not it either. It's a bit more nuanced than that. The point, right, that I'm trying to make is that we have to look deeper than the Yamas and Niyamas, because whatever we do, we have to realize that we're falling out of these, conscribing to these attempts to live a life. In fact, when you look at Patanjali's Yamas, and again, this is going to be contentious because not everyone agrees with this. But when you look at his Yamas, I'd say they look like monk's vows. I say they look like the universal monk's vows we see, like the vows of a monastic that we see worldwide. Obedience, chastity, and poverty. These are the three monks' vows. Obedience, well, you're following them. Chastity, that's brahmacharya. And poverty, aparigraha, not clasping, not hoarding. Same. And he's saying, he's talking to monks, I believe. You might not have the same view on the text, but I believe that's a text for monastics, that there's very deep, very high aiming text for those monks that have gone into the monastery and they're living according to those rules. And in the monastery, I suppose you can, you literally possibly could almost do no harm, right? You're not trying to, you're not buying anything, you're not consuming, you're not doing any real, everything is given for you. So it's possible maybe to live by those rules. But in our society where we have all these choices, we buy stuff. Of course we do. We want certain foods, certain clothes, certain holidays. All natural. It's not that simple if we're living in the world. It's not even possible, I would say, to live by ahimsa. So first of all, I would say that, not to say we can't use Patanjali, but I might say he's best used in the breach rather than the observance, Because if you're using the observance, I'll explain what I mean by that. If you're using the observance, then it's like, well, it's too easy to fall into the trap and say, well, now I've got my mala beat on, I'm vegetarian, I'm living in truth, I'm not stealing at anyone, you know what I mean. Again, I'm not trying to mock anyone here, but, because, this is reasonable and it's nice to try and live a better life than conscribe to our worst tendencies, which are obviously there in ourselves as well, right? So that's reasonable, but it's too easy to get into virtue signaling there, right? I'm good, and this person who's not doing yoga, not a vegetarian, not living by these things isn't so good. Yeah. And to feel rather smug, let's say, about oneself. And I was there as well, certainly. But I think that falls into the trap of just simple virtue signaling, virtue ego again. Just now we've got a spiritual ego. Yeah, as Shogam Trungpa would say, spiritual materialism. Now we've got the spiritual ego that we're actually, again, better than other people, but this time in a spiritual sense. Not because we've got nicer clothes this time or a better job, etc., but because we're more spiritual than them. Yeah. And then we start to judge all other people. Certainly I did this very much so when I was in the early days of my yoga. It's quite uncomfortable, actually. You don't feel good about doing it, You go to your family's home for dinner, whatever, it's a special holiday or whatever. And you go there and you start to make all these judgments. Oh, no, I wouldn't do like that. I wouldn't buy that. That's not organic, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, the meat, you're eating meat still, all this stuff, you don't feel good about it either, right? And it doesn't lead you any good place because you want harmony with other people, not dissent. Yeah? So the yamas can actually be, obviously, and then you're causing ahimsa again. So you're stuck in causing violence, some kind of violence, right? I mean, because the more obvious way that people use it, well, they say, well, it's not just when there's an attempt to make it more nuanced than just literally non-violence, because it's assumed that people aren't practicing yoga and then going out and punching other people. Then they'll say, oh, it's not non-violence of the body, right? It's non-violence of the mind, to not think violently or speak violently or have violent thoughts, like a disharmonious and conflictive thoughts. Yeah, that's something. But again, it goes deeper than that, because really I think it's more interesting to look and say, well, every time we notice we're falling out of the yamas, that's more interesting, right? And when we're saying, well, look, I'm ordering online, I'm ordering organic so-and-so, but then, how am I'm trying to do my best, right? But then how am I causing himsa? It's not to say you beat yourself up, because it's too easy to get into the flagellation thing again, especially being Western and albeit non-Christian now, but still in the Christian tradition of culture, I think. Yeah. So it's all too easy to go, oh, well, I shouldn't buy these things. And, I'm causing suffering by buying from cheap clothing stores, from Bangladesh and, No, I don't think that is helpful. I think that's just, it's just another kind of, I think it actually ends up in this, a certain kind of ego there, the kind of poor me kind of ego. No, just notice, right? We're causing harm. Yeah. As human beings, we can't help it. Sometimes we cause more harm than other times. We're being less conscious than more conscious. But we're in the civil war in the Bhagavad Gita, where we're damned if we do, and we're damned if we don't, really. Yeah, whatever our actions, and even the best actions, somewhere down the road, they're going to turn around and call, so you do a good action now, but you can't know how it's going to turn out in the future. It's going to cause some suffering in the future. So again, not to say that the yamas are some kind of reasonable aspiration to try and live well, but they're a small part of a bigger picture. And if we're going to use them, I would say, or we're going to think about ethics, I would definitely turn to the Bhagavad Gita, because I think that's for a text for people living in the world rather than for monastics that weren't needing to live and interact in the world. Yeah. So let's turn to the yamas more specifically. And then we do so, and we know, well, actually, the difficulty is with Patanjali, as much as he's a pocketbook, and as for yoga, a kind of 101, you've got a bit of asana, pranayama, it all fits in nicely. Yeah, it does. Yeah. The problem is that it doesn't really give further phrasing of what they are. It doesn't give further elaboration, right? What is non-violence? Okay, we know literally non-violence, but again, okay, someone's been to a yoga class, they're feeling pretty good, they're practicing yoga regularly. It's not likely they're going to purposefully go out and steal and lie and hit people, be violent, right? That's kind of obvious. So then it's like, well, do they actually really help us unless we're trying to virtue signal almost, right? I kind of feel that they're not that helpful because they don't give that much in-depth further elaboration of the issue. And like I said, the issue is unsolvable in the end. We're constantly, as long as we're consuming, we're somewhat stealing exploiting other people's time, right? Because capitalism exploits people's time for profit margins. So we're always stealing. And truth, well, that's a whole other issue, isn't it? How truthful are we all the time? And sometimes it's better to be not quite truthful to be non-violent. You can say a truth, but it ends up being a violence to someone else. So again, it's not that simple. So does Patanjali really help us with that? Of course he doesn't really. And then it's more tricky because you come to brahmacharya and people will say, well, it doesn't really mean brahmacharya, like celibacy. It means us just having sex with one person at a time. But of course, well, he does mean that. He does mean celibacy because he's talking to monks after all. So, yeah, we kind of fall down there because no one generally wants to do that. But there's this whole thing in Hatha yoga about it's for men about, and there is a women's thing as well about conserving semen, and then women have conserving the sexual fluid as well. Yeah, so and that's the potency of the body in for Hatha yoga. So you're meant to conserve that and not squander it. Yeah, I refer you to Nathan's recent podcast of Escaping Samsara on this exact issue. For men and women, he's done a few with men and a few from a women's perspective on this importance of preserving this nectar, this bindu, this basically the sexual fluids. Yeah, so they're great podcasts, by the way. So, where does that land us? So, where that lands us is just thinking, well, okay, maybe we take it from the other way around and we think, well, if it's irresolvable, then really what we need to focus on is our own house, i.e. our own inner house, right? And so because it's very hard to know how to act in the world and very confusing, and we've got confusion on the inside of us as well, right? We think we see clearly, but we're confused on the inside, right? Then maybe we need to work on that inner alignment, and then that might precipitate the outer alignment. So, I mean, my perspective, and I think you've kind of got the gist of it already, perhaps, is that this is Hatha yoga, and this is why we were taught Hatha yoga before the Yamas and Niyamas. Why people often say, "Did Pattabhi Jois ever teach moral philosophy? Did he teach Yamas and Niyamas?" And I said, "Well, he said you teach asana first," and B.K.S. Iyengar said exactly the same for purification of the inside, because then it's likely you're more acting more harmoniously when the inside is clearer. It's clearer, not purified. More, the inside is clearer. Yep. We'll put it this way. Say you act, and this is a bit more philosophical to do with Kant, right? The philosopher Immanuel Kant. Say you act very well, right? He gets into this paradox there where the best action is the one that a person takes most against their will, right? So this is the wrong way around for us as yoga aspirants, yeah, aspiring yogis. But for moral philosophy, it doesn't make sense. The person is the most moral who acts most against their will to act well. Do you get the idea? So you're doing a really good action, but you really don't want to. They're the most moral, right? Because if you just did that action naturally, it wouldn't be a moral action because you're not trying, right? So you see, that's where philosophy gets you, and why I stopped doing philosophy at a graduate level, because it just ties you in these silly twists of logic which don't make sense in the end. Yeah. So in actual fact, that's stupid, isn't it? Because the goodness has to come on the inside. If you're acting again, and this is where we get with, this is what my point was. If you're trying to follow the yamas, yeah, and you're constantly feeling that this is difficult inside, then there's this huge conflict. And so this is why they say work on the inside, not the outside, because then there's this schism. You're trying to constantly be good, yeah, against your better judgment, because you don't feel like acting that way. We don't feel like acting well all the time because we're light and dark. So there's this huge schism, this huge split between trying to act in a way that we feel we ought to, and then not feeling that way inside because we're trying to live a yoga lifestyle. And it's not to say that we shouldn't try and act decently, but putting the emphasis on that as our yoga path can easily create this kind of difficult tension in us, yeah, rather than thinking, okay, I'm going to try and act well, but I'm going to fall down, because it's not coming naturally from the inside of me, because there's so much confusion and mixed emotions inside me that I don't always act well, and I know I don't always act well, but I'm working on purifying the inside of me, and then I'll naturally act better on the outside of me. So it's like that's the other way around, trying to act well, because that's yoga, and you have this narrative, more and more creeping into Hatha yoga, really, that it's all about the yamas and the niyamas, yeah. And then it's like, well, not really in my mind. It's about Hatha yoga is about a physical method of inner conflict resolution, basically. Yeah, of cleansing that inside to align our purpose with the natural order. And perhaps I'm also optimistic, but I think the natural order is somewhat towards the light, somewhat towards the positive, albeit that we're stuck in material reality that doesn't allow us to, because there's always going to be this confusion. I mean, no one, we're always going to be in a world where not everyone follows this order, and it's going to cause these situations like Arjuna found himself in, where he's in a battle, people are attacking his family, and if he lets them die, then obviously he's caused, because he doesn't defend them, he's caused violence, and if he attacks the enemy, then he's caused the violence. But of course he's got to attack the enemy. He's got to live dynamically, right? Yeah. I mean, I think that's often the other thing that happens when people try and overly follow the yamas, first of all, without thinking that what they're doing is hatha yoga. It's an inner practice of cleansing, ultimately. It gets all a bit shrinking violet or quietism. Yeah. You know what that means? It's kind of like when you're not passivity towards life, that fatalistic, well, I'm not, that turn the other cheek of Jesus, all a bit too much like that, I mean, I remember the Tibetan Buddhists used to, when I lived in Tibetan Buddhist centers in UK, in fact, it's not unfortunately as exotic as living in Tibet, but I lived with them in the UK and meditated because I was very interested in that in my early days, and I still am. They used to get given that question quite often, like, what do you do if someone grabs your family and is dragging them down a dark alley to mug them? And they said, I'll turn around and hit them in the face. The Lama, the Tibetan monk, said, of course, yep. It's not as literal as non-violence, right? And this is where you get in the Bhagavad Gita, that nuance, that this is why I like the text a lot more, in a sense, as a guide to daily life, that nuanced idea of what is really non-violence is, and that's where they come up with Dharma. Yeah. So the Indian, I say Southeast Asian, Indian ethics, which is there, is Dharma. So it's more than just living virtuously in the eyes of a society. And that's unfortunately where our Western morality gets us these days, right? That we're just simply living according to seeming good, because we know that seeming good, seeming a good person, gets us value in the eyes of society, and more gets us what we want. And seeming bad in the eyes of society, we're frightened of. Of course, we're frightened of doing bad actions unless we're a psychopath, because we know that society will judge us badly for that, and they'll go badly. But do we really mean that? If we could, and this is the question posed in, again, I'll go back to my philosophical roots, the question posed by Plato at the start of his Republic. Is it better to actually be good, or seem good? And it seems like an obvious answer. Well, of course, it's better to be good. But what if it was better? What if in being good, you seemed bad to society? And what if seeming good, you could seem good, but actually have bad intentions? And we can think of many examples of this. You could see, right, in the modern day. I won't mention any particular examples, but you can imagine your own. So is there anything inherent in goodness that makes it good? Or is it just good enough for our own, if we're wanting to use goodness for our own intentions, to seem good in the eyes of society, right? And this is where I think we can easily get with the yamas in just trying to appear good, because we like to feel that we're good because we judge ourselves, our value now in the eyes of society. So we've internalized society's moral injunctions, which were there only to for the sake of society in the first place, because we couldn't have conflict. It's better, first of all, it's better not to have conflict, than just be in constant conflict with each other. So society comes up with a group of agreed rules, and then those get internalized as an inherent morality. But is there anything good in that morality, right? Inherently good in not attacking other people? I mean, these questions are all worth asking oneself, and just in terms of expanding the dialogue. And you can say, well, of course it is. Of course it's not good to kill anyone. What are you talking about? We're doing yoga here after all, right? And I would agree, luckily. Nevertheless, we come back to the question. I know it gets confusing, right? So if we could just appear good, and not actually, and how often do we do that, right? How often do we appear good? Because we are frightened of appearing, or put it another way, how often do you really stick your neck up above the trenches, as it were, stick your neck up and say, head up and say, well, I believe in this because I believe authentically it's right. Yep. And how often, I mean, especially with the current day, right, and social media and stuff, how often you just not do that because you feel like people won't get it, or they'll attack you for it, or you'll be judged badly for saying what you think now. Yeah. So we're afraid of that, but that is the ultimate challenge, I think, for yoga. It's not about seeming good. It's not even really about goodness, because that's really it's albeit a reasonable social construct that, to think that we're a sentient being that feels pain and doesn't like to be harmed, and the person next to us also must have those feelings and also doesn't like to be harmed and would feel that pain as we do. So it doesn't kind of make sense to extrapolate that that we shouldn't cause them pain either, just like we wouldn't be wanting to be caused pain. But nevertheless, yoga is aiming higher than that, to this ultimate kind of truth beyond relative ethics, let's say. Is there anything good in goodness? Yeah. Is there anything right in being in our authenticity? And I would say yes. I would say Kavalya, this is the highest aim of yoga ethics. Kavalya means aloneness. It means having the courage of your convictions, having true authenticity of saying, well, I believe this, not necessarily because it's socially right, not because it seems non-violent or seems kind, because you really believe in what you believe in. Yeah? That is aloneness, or standing alone, or as Shyam Ranganathan in the recent podcast talked about, sovereignty. Yeah? This conviction of having self-sovereignty in the end, that we're looking to stand independently of being judged by society as right or wrong, having the courage of our own convictions. Because increasingly, I think the society's gotten so strong that we're just petrified, of me included, to stick your head up and say what you believe, because you'll be cancelled. Yeah, or you have so much vitriol directed against you. Yeah. Not to say that my opinions are that conflictive necessarily, but there's a sense of increasingly a fear of standing up and saying, I'm confident as an individual. Right? And I think that ultimately is the path of yoga, when you cut that self-conviction comes from the inside, from the method itself. Right. Otherwise, you could easily just conscribe yourself to being a sheep again and say, well, I'm just following the ahimsa, non-violence, according to, because it's got to be according to something, because Patanjali doesn't give you any rules about it, according to the current social narrative. Yeah. Goodness, basically ahimsa, satya, steya, all goodness, or according, but we've got nothing other to follow apart from the social narrative. So what if you were living in the late 1930s, early 40s in Germany, for example, and you were following that narrative of social goodness? Or, that's unfair to pick perhaps that particular example of it, but people followed naturally because we're so frightened of sticking up for ourselves. Yeah. But that's the worry, isn't it? Is that social goodness actual goodness? Yeah, or can we easily, by following society, fall into a trap? Yeah. So ultimately, yoga is aiming higher than that by using this inner method of cleansing one's mind. And the way that we might use yamas is actually to say, well, I can see I'm constantly not doing these things. I can see that my ego is telling me that I want that cheaper. I don't want to pay that price. I don't always want to be totally truthful about everything. I'm committing violence every time I walk down the road to all unseen people, because just me being here. And again, this is not to do with self-blame whatsoever, because that's another sense of virtue signaling in a way. This is to do with looking at the problem deeper than simply yoga as a performative social ethics, because it's not, I think. So, I'm happy for you to debate this, or give me some more feedback on these ideas, because I've kind of wrestled with them a lot, and I'm not sure that they're, all completely watertight as of yet, and I don't think they ever will be, but I think it's a more interesting proposition than simply using Patanjali as a kind of reappraised Western ethics again, which is all too much what he falls into, right? And then, but of course, with the the objection of brahmacharya, which we've rephrased to suit our own purposes because we don't necessarily want not to have sex, and a parigraha, which is not a parigraha is actually non-clinging to life itself. Yeah, but we've kind of rephrased that as non-grasping. So it's like, well, I'm not attached, or, when I don't want to be. There's non-clinging to life, right? It's poverty, true poverty, as I said at the start, is a monk's vows, pretty deep. Niyamas, I mentioned yamas and niyamas, but it's mainly the yamas we're talking about, really. But niyamas, I might say something. Again, the first niyama is often translated as cleanliness. And again, I think we have to do some work to make them make sense for us. So we take them literally, because the thing is, we take them literally where we want to. We say, well, it's literally non-harm. Yeah, that's what he means, literally non-harm. Yeah, so I'm going to, but well, of course, you can't literally non-harm. So you have to look at Dharma, like what's the right cause of life. Right? We'll look at that in a second to finish off Dharma as opposed to Western morality. Yeah. And then we don't want to, we don't translate it literally. So then we'll go, okay, brahmacharya, I don't want to translate it literally. I'll translate that kind of figuratively, right? So it's like we could have used them literally, but then we use them figuratively. And then we come to niyam and we find cleanliness. And it's like, well, I'm going to translate that literally as keeping a clean house or a clean state of mind. But of course we can't, like unless we've done that inner work, we can't keep a clean state of mind. Yeah. I translate that more interestingly. I think it's more interesting, obviously, as simplicity, the cleanliness, not cleanliness, but more simplicity, having a simple perspective on life, right? Taking the simpler route and not complicating the issue. And too often times we complicate the issue, just trying to distract ourselves really from ourselves, right? Make all these type complicated plans and rather than keeping things simple. Maybe that's that. Yeah. We come up with the next one, santosha. Santosha is a beautiful idea, isn't it? Contentment. Yeah. And we end up trying to be content. Yeah. Basically pretending to be content. Yeah. So again, as I said, it sets up this kind of battle in ourselves where we ought to be content. We don't feel content. We ought to show that we're content to other people because that's being yogic after all. So we want to appear at least content. Yeah. And it's this battle rather than thinking, well, okay, I'm not content. Let's be honest, because also look at it this way, right? Trying to be content is dishonesty. It is a contradiction of satya, honesty. Yeah. So trying to do any of the moral injunctions when you don't feel like them is falling into satya. Yeah? You're not being honest, right? But then should we be totally honest? I really don't feel content. I'm miserable, or really be honest in our violence and our violence instincts, for example. That's really gets really confusing, isn't it? And as I said at the start, it's not like I'm saying to you, do what you want, do that what thou will. I think that's a very dangerous kind of, and some Advaita Vedanta gurus in the modern era have kind of fallen into that trap, I think, of just saying, well, there's no such thing as morality because it's a social construct just for, to keep the social order. Yeah. And it doesn't matter. And there's no, all that matters is consciousness manifesting itself naturally as consciousness. But I think that's a dangerous thing to state of mind to fall into until one's got some self-control. So I'm not saying that we don't need to abide by some sense of those yamas, whether we call them yamas or whether we just say, look, abide by social morality. It keeps a discipline, it keeps an order, it keeps us from causing more trouble for ourselves, until we naturally realize it from the inside out. Yeah. But the focus, I suppose this is probably where I come down to, and it's not that an interesting point in the end, is it? But the focus is on the inner cleansing, not the outside subscribing to the outer morality, but the inner cleansing. Yeah. So the yamas and niyamas naturally follow from us, and we're in no contradiction anymore. Yeah. And it's easier focusing on the physical cleansing than the mental cleansing, because you can trick yourself. It's so easy to trick oneself. Oh, I feel so content. Yeah. But you don't really. But you want to. You want to appear like that. Yeah. So you kind of even trick yourself as well as tricking others about how you feel. Yeah. Such an easy trap to fall into, right? And so I think it's perhaps I remember one advice I was given by John Scott, the teacher I interviewed last week on the podcast, my first teacher. He said, practice how you feel, because it's all too easy to get into the yoga class. And he thought, I ought to be calm and serene in this class, and yogic. So you start trying to practice that way, and you don't feel like inside at all. You maybe feel really anxious, really angry. Yep. So what do? Yeah. Yeah, there's a contradiction of ahimsa, or do you contradict satya and not being yourself? Yeah, and maybe the struggle in itself, maybe that struggle in itself is the thing, to realize you're damned if you do again, damned if you don't, and there's something deeper to pursue, which is consciousness. Yeah, which is being with yourself, which is aligning that inner energy so you can be with yourself, because before you've aligned that inner turmoil, it just isn't a place you'd want to go inside. It's just not a place you'd want to be. So you have to align that physically with the breathing, with the energy work, which is creating a right tension in the spine and around the nerves of the spine, and the breathing, the diaphragm. I mentioned that last week a little bit. And it gradually cleanses those conflictive emotions from the body. Is there anything else to say? Well, we were talking about niyamas, weren't we? And Saucha, Santosha, Tapas, Vajaya. Yeah, tapas I like. You need a discipline, but also it's more nuanced than that, isn't it? Because it's not a discipline of penance, of making yourself suffer, right? And we can easily get into that in yoga, and I've talked about that so much, right? Like, this is not old Christian medieval morality where we take a stick and we beat ourselves on the back, as it is said in the Bhagavad Gita, that those people that make their body suffer, they're making me, i.e. God, in the body suffer. Yeah, it's like a middle path of being disciplined, but not exerting suffering on ourselves. Yeah. Anyway, we come to the final conclusion of Dharma. So what does Dharma mean then for in Indian? And is it a system of Indian ethics, right? Well, not really. But then Dharma itself is a very nuanced thing, because the Dharma in the Bhagavad Gita obviously was to do your duty. And as everyone knows, if you've read the Bhagavad Gita, it's kind of uncomfortable these days, because that duty is caste, isn't it? That duty is that the Brahmins do the Brahmin stuff, and the untouchables, they do their stuff, right? And everyone sticks to their caste. And then we try and translate it to modern life. Okay, so that was that time that basically you're born into a certain lifestyle and you live a certain lifestyle. Fair enough. But then now, we're not born into a certain lifestyle. So Dharma, the idea of doing what your duty is to beg the question, i.e. it's to ask the question, like, what the hell is our Dharma these days? And that's where I get stuck, because Dharma isn't clear like it used to be. I mean, and that's why I don't have a problem with those original ideas in the Bhagavad Gita of everyone doing their thing, because it's like, well, that's, better to do your thing if you're born into being a Brahmin or born into being that, then, than try and be discontented by trying to be anything other, because society was so rigid at that time, one didn't really have the choice to move around. But these days it's not rigid. These days it seems a lot more fluid. I mean, there are, more. It's not as fluid as we're allowed to think it is. But nevertheless, there is some fluidity. There is some ability to move within society. Yeah, and Dharma is therefore a really, really difficult question, because you're not born into your occupation. You're not born into your social position. You're not born into your role in life. You're having to make choices for yourself. Yeah. And also, you're not, it would just be fatalism to say, well, I should just do what's in front of me. I should just do my duty. Say you're in an abusive relationship or an abusive job. You should just stay in that job because it's your duty, because it's, no, of course not. That would be committing a violence to yourself, not being truthful to yourself, right? Allowing others to be violent as well. Yeah. So the question of Dharma, again, is a really nuanced idea. And also, I think there's always also a tinge of, it's not just about social morality of being more right than the other person. Yeah, it's about an inner justness, of an inner sovereignty of, and like it said in the one thing that said about asana in the Yoga Sutras, that person is free of the pairs of opposites. Yeah, of blame and criticism. Yep, asana. That's how they define asana. That person that doesn't care about social blame or social praise. Yeah, is free of the pairs of opposites. That person is themselves. Is finally, because before that, we're completely led by the nose of trying to seem, because we're afraid. We're deeply afraid if we don't have society's backing. We're in the wild again. Like fending for ourselves or put in jail in the modern context. Yeah. So, but that person is completely themselves. Yeah. That's a kind of the kind of higher aspiration of Dharma. Is doing what you think comes from the inside naturally and is right. It doesn't always mean doing the same thing, because of course our lives are multifaceted these days. They're not just flowing. It's not just like, well, we start off at the start with a certain Dharma and it's our calling. I mean, some people have that, their calling in life, but many people it changes midstream or a number of times in life. So I think this is the wrestling with the yamas is the interesting question. And maybe not even looking at them in terms of these kind of truth, ethics, rightness, for non-harming, because that kind of puts this obvious moral spin on them when the whole question is to beg the question itself as to how one should act, and then looking at how one wants to act, maybe you don't want to act in the right way, but it's the right way, and then what do you do? Then this is the interesting threshold of the individual within society, because we're both things, right? We're an individual within society, living part as in a joint, let's say, in a joint promise to each other that we're going to help each other out, because we can do a lot more if we're not completely on our own, if we do it in a collective, and others act decently towards us, and therefore we should uphold that, and act decently towards them, and then living as an individual where there's none of that, right? Where it's the courage of one's own convictions, where that's what you deeply believe in, metaphysically, even like beyond this life, Or is it? Or because if there isn't anything beyond this life at all, or anything greater to aspire to in this life, apart from simply materialism, right? Just being a decent member of society. If yoga is converted to simply humanistic endeavors like materialism, then maybe the yamas do make a little bit more sense to live in that way. But if there's something more than that, if it's not just materialism, there's something about consciousness, then the question becomes a lot more challenging, let's say. Anyway, a few ideas, and I'm sorry I haven't been able to completely solve them, but that's the whole point, isn't it? I think the yoga is the inquiry, it's the process of debate, Socrates, the original philosopher, he was put to death by encouraging people to inquire. And established society obviously doesn't want people to inquire, because it wants people to follow their orders. So yoga, I think it's, to quote John, really, it's always been, John Scott of the last week, it's always been somewhat of a kind of anti-establishment thing, because it encourages you to inquire. And when you inquire, you find that many of your answers might put you in discordance with the general consensus. And then what do you do? Because you don't want to be violent either. And if you struggle with these things, I think that's, in a sense, don't struggle too much, because you don't want to make yourself suffer for it. But it's good. And then continue your inner work of trying to align the inner energy, because it's always said in yoga, once the inner is aligned, everything seems right on the outside, even if it isn't. Anyway, I could waffle on for a lot longer, but I'll leave you there for today. And just to say, the online intensive is coming up, where we'll discuss these and more questions. And I'm not giving conclusions. It's not my interest as a teacher. I'm always kind of ambivalent about the role of the teacher, because I haven't got the answers, but I can help you inquire, and I can give you some other people to inquire with and other ideas to inquire about. So the online intensive is coming up next month. I'd love to see you there. Get in touch with me if you need a discount or anything like that. I'm sure I can help you out. Or come and see me in Goa, Pebble Valley. I know it's a bit far to go to India for November, but I'd love to see you there. A few spaces there, and it'll be with Magnus Freeth, who's joining me for the meditation aspect of things. He's leading the meditation, so it's a multifaceted teaching endeavor. Or in December, I'm doing another meditation thing. I'm trying to bring a little bit more meditation to the yoga, you might have noticed, with Ellen Johansson, and that will be in Malaga in Spain. And it's over Christmas, and I think just before the new year it finishes, but it's over Christmas Day and all that. So if you want to get away from the normal Christmas and have something different, then I'd love to see you in Malaga as well. Otherwise, the online Mysore classes go on as normal, 6 to 8:30 UK time, and I'd love to see you there. And don't think you have to come for every day or even for every week. You can come whenever you fancy. It's a very open space for you just to practice and feel supported by the community. So that's me for today, and next week we'll join you with another guest. Hope you have a great week. Until then, take care and bye.